Uh, it's been something my whole life. When I was a kid, I was the kid who loved to draw, and at least I thought I was good at it. And that's the thing is sometimes you think you're good at something, and so you keep doing it, and that's how you get good. So I don't know if I really was or not, but I have a distinct memory of drawing a horse in the first grade and just sort of knowing like I got this. This is my thing. Um, I wouldn't be surprised if that horse looked like every other first grader's horse, but in my mind, I was like, oh yeah, I got this. Like all little kids draw. And, but most people, when you're like middle school age, something like that, you sort of choose like, oh, I'm good at sports and that's all you do, or I'm good at whatever. And I just stayed with art the whole time. I never stopped. So yeah, that's how. I went to art school. I went to a school called the Corcoran. It doesn't exist anymore, but it's just an art school in DC. It wasn't like a university. That's all we did. And it was a good school. Um, Interestingly enough, drawing and painting was always my thing when I was young. And when I went to art school, uh, sometimes you can get caught up in this kind of intellectual rabbit hole and um I actually decided that painting was an outdated image making process, and I was doing sculpture with found objects when I was in art school.
Mm.
The funny thing is, I would go home at night and secretly paint because it's what I love to do. Um, and I got out of art school and you get out of school and you're like, oh, what do I do? What do I do? And I didn't even think I was making art. I was like, oh, I'm just going to screw around and paint some. And I didn't even have good paints. I had like some crappy old acrylic paints. And at first I was just like, I'd paint on a paper bag. Um, but it took me a while and some conversations with people to sort of give myself permission to just be a painter. And intellectual critical arguments aside, what it came down to is that's what I love to do.
Yeah.
Um, and so from there, then I just worked and worked and worked, and I'm still working at it. So yeah, I think first of all, I think that that's a big responsibility for an artist is to generate their own ideas. I mean, I know there's lots of like people that are always looking for prompts, and there's things like Inktober that provides people with prompts and ideas and stuff, but I think it's really important that artists come up with their own way to find their own prompts. That I mean, if you're an illustrator, you're going to have a career where you're being told like, we need a drawing of this. You're going to be handed prompts, and then that's a whole different thing. But for me, a big part of my job is finding those ideas. In my experience, you just get to work sometimes. If you don't know what to do, you take your sketchbook and you go draw. And I sometimes I will even I'll, if I ever feel stuck, that's what I do. I take my sketchbook and I go out and draw, and I'm not allowed to come home till I have a drawing. If you do that or something like that, like unless you're, dead inside or something, like you're going to get ideas. If you go out and draw enough things, like something's going to be like, okay, I can do something with that, you know? Um, it's not necessarily always going to like be easy. It's not necessarily going to like hit you like a bolt of lightning, but if you do that enough, something's going to come along and you'll find something. So for me, I guess the short answer is work generates work, you know? You get to work and it'll like that will tell you what to do next. I'm primarily an oil painter. Um, Drawing factors in really big with what I do, and you know, that that's when I teach at your school, drawing is what I focus on, and I really do believe that like if you've got your drawing down, building beyond that, like drawing is how I figure things out. And then you've got that's a foundation and you can just build from there.
Mhm.
So uh my paintings always start with a drawing. Yeah, I can. Sometimes I will, draw in a sketchbook and it's just a compositional idea. Sometimes I'll have drawing in a sketchbook that's really, or maybe be it more than just a sketchbook that's really like almost like a roadmap for the whole painting that really does have like it's accurate and has like the structure of just how I want the composition done. Another important thing is a painting is a really complex thing. Um, and like anything that's complex, if you can break it down into simpler bite-sized chunks, it makes the problem easier to solve. So what I find is if I can take care of my drawing problems first, and by drawing problems, I mean things like anything you could solve with a pencil and paper. Scale, placement of things, proportion, all those things. Even like basic composition, if I can take care of that first, then I'm a lot more free when it gets to the paint, like paint specific things. There's drawings of ducks and geese and everything, and they're really quick and gestural sketches, and they happen really fast. I'm drawing from life, and those birds in the park don't hang out for too long, so you get kind of minimal information that way. And what I found was that so let's say I'm drawing a landscape and I'm out or painting a landscape and I'm out there and I can see all the texture. I can see every individual leaf, every twig, all these things. And so my job there is to sort of edit it down to see if I can figure out how to simplify that complex landscape down into, distill it down into like what's the how much can I get away with not putting in? But then when I started doing these drawings from or paintings from these drawings, it's the opposite problem because I all I have is a drawing and I don't have all the information. I don't have the textures. I don't have the colors. I don't have any of that. And so it's the opposite problem. So I have to fill in information that's not there. And, it forces me to use my imagination more. It forces me to work from memory and also forces me to sort of ask rather than just trying to make it true to life, what's the just artistically, what is the best thing to go here? What does the painting itself want? Whether that's what the actual texture of the grass looked like or not, what's going to fit into this composition the best? And technically, there's really nothing. It's oil paint. It works the way it normally does. I probably do some things that are a little bit non-traditional. Like recently, I've used like a plastic comb to scratch the paint. I'll use the brush handle and draw back into it sometimes. If you see like little scratches and textures in my painting, sometimes it's things like that. I don't ever use my fingers. Um, but I'm not saying I wouldn't, you know. So, but I like to um I don't think there's any rule book as far as like technique that like, oh, you must always do this or must not always do that. Generally the paint builds up, kind of medium thick, and I like to work wet into wet, but lots of times the paintings especially if it's a painting I'm working on for several days, then I will build up layers and sometimes transparencies and stuff like that come into play. But nothing technically is nothing really fancy. First of all, birds are cool. They're dinosaurs. Um, they're yeah, I like looking at stuff like that. I like animals, and they're kind of fascinating. I think anything if you get really into it, like I know people that are really into grass. You get really into it, and then all of a sudden it gets cool. The more you when you start learning stuff about it, um, and yeah, I like the birds, and I do. I'm nerdy enough. I don't mind admitting, like I sometimes go to sleep at night watching videos on YouTube about dinosaurs and stuff. And when when I made that or had was given that revelation that birds are dinosaurs, I think that and then you look at their feet and you're like, oh wow, they really are. That kind of made them cool. Um, And I also like the challenge. I like that they don't hold still. When what I teach in your school is I teach life drawing. We're working on, we specifically don't use photos, and I even address that in there, and we recognize how like this feels different. It is a different thing than copying a flat photograph. That's I'm very into the reason I go out and paint from life, like I stand in the landscape, is I'm in it for the experience, and I feel like, and this is going to sound a little woo-woo, but I sort of feel like if I'm there on the spot, if I'm not just looking at shapes and colors, but if I'm also feeling the weather, if I can hear birds or insects, if I can smell things, that somehow that's going to, I don't know how specifically, but somehow that the fact that I was having like a whole experience is going to come through in that painting, and it's going to put some more life into it. It's what I believe. It seems to work for me, so I keep doing it. Um, so when it comes to drawing from life, to me, even having someone that's posing and holding still, which I do plenty of, I want to see if I can go beyond that. Can I draw something that's like not at all fixed or there, that's not planned, that's not there just for me? And the bird doesn't care that I'm drawing, and they're always moving around. And so but if you have some bird seed with you, they'll stay around long enough, you know, that you can like, and then you have to solve the problem. Like these things are moving all around. Can I, how can I solve the problem? So I think they're interesting to me in that way, and just a living problem, and they're predictable enough, you know, like the birds I'm drawing are, they're not entirely wild. They live at the park. They eat things that people feed them. I know that I can go to the park and I will have geese and I will have pigeons there, but they're still wild enough that they're not going to hold still. And they're not going to make it easy for me. And it gives me an interesting problem to solve. For one thing, I'll just tell you, if I go too long without making art, uh, I don't do so great. I've noticed this connection with like where I live and where I am in my life, and how that changes my art. And I'm aware of it. And before I moved here, I was living off Hall Street in South Side, and I just started painting this kind of, I was like, I sort of thought of it as almost this suburban wasteland that was around me. And it wasn't a place that people would say, oh, this is a beautiful part of town. It was a utilitarian part of town. It was like it served the people that lived there and everything, but it wasn't beautiful. And so I kind of, maybe I like, what can I find here that is beautiful or that's interesting? Um, and not, it didn't feel right to go look for an idealized space. It didn't feel right to leave the place that I actually lived, that all like, and that everyone there actually lived in, and go to the beach or the mountains and only paint those idealized scenes. Um, Now what I'm struggling with is that I moved out to the country, and it's just green everywhere, like in the summer. Like it like there I in a lot of my previous work, like power lines and stuff were a big factor. There's no power lines out here. There's just trees. So I'm having to kind of solve that, which now it seems like it's even more difficult. Like, how do I paint this place where it's just like green woods everywhere? And I haven't solved it yet. I don't know how I'm going to respond to it. I might actually just, it's funny. I move out to this beautiful place. Now I might just start working in my studio. The place I'm in, and how what's going on in my life has a really big factor. It has become a really big factor in my work, and it does help me sort of, yeah, process the world around me. I think that is an important thing. My dad is in the last chapter of his life right now, and um it's funny, I've never really drawn. I've only drawn my parents a few times when they weren't looking, and I have done some drawings of my dad. So here's what's weird about watching someone you've known your whole life age. First of all, you can't always see it. It's like looking at yourself. I mean, you might see like you see it if you look back at a picture of yourself when you were little and you're like, "Oh, I have grown up some." But you don't see it on a day-to-day basis, and you don't see it with the people around you either. It just it happens really gradually. And seeing my dad, it's weird because he's if he lives another 3 weeks, he's going to be 90 years old, and I still look at him and he's instant. He's it's the same guy I've always seen my whole life. And then when I draw him, I do see that he's just like a husk of the guy that he was, that he's like a little, uh, and I can see that he's old and that he is this like old dying man, honestly. But at the same time, sometimes I'll be drawing and I'll make a mark and I'm like, that's him. That's his face. And there's even been times where one time I was drawing him and I saw like I could recognize myself in him. Like there was something about him. It's like that's like my nose has that angle. But I'm not sad when I'm doing those drawings or paintings. It sort of helps me to be a little bit objective and then I look and I look at the drawings and it makes me sort of aware of like what I see when I'm seeing him. Um, and the objective facts versus we see everything through our own lens of experience. Um, like you wonder what you look like to other people. I wonder these nurses that are taking care of him that never saw who he was. I mean, he's got dementia really bad. He barely even talks anymore. And they don't see that this is a guy who like he went to Princeton and MIT. He has a PhD, he has patents in his name. And I can still see that. And so when I draw and sometimes I might feel like I get both. I get to see the guy I recognize, but also kind of get a glimpse of objectively who he might appear to be to other people. So I think that's an extreme case, but when I'm drawing or painting someone, just like when I like to be out in a landscape to paint a landscape, when I'm drawing or painting a person, I like having them there in person. And um I'm this will sound a little arrogant, but like I don't need you to hold still. I'm good enough at drawing. Like I can figure it out.
Mhm.
It's almost I would rather have someone come out and just be there and talk to them, get to and know who they are. That always makes it better. If you actually scroll through my Instagram and there's a picture of a guy, a friend Matt, wearing a red shirt holding a guitar.
Mhm.
When he came in, he's just a friend of mine. We've known each other for years, and he came out, and I was like, sit in that chair. I told him, yeah, bring a guitar because he's a musician. He never held still. We just sat there and had a conversation for like 2 hours, and I just painted away. And like he never, I mean, he stayed in the same place, the same way that you and I are, but he never like froze up. And that
Yeah.
I think that made it better. And I even think it's if you can catch someone in a way that it feels like they're talking in the painting, rather than like pose. There's a different, you can see when someone's posing versus, and I think I got him the way that he looks and feels when he's in conversation. I approach that as a different set of problems than painting a person. Compositionally, it's huge. With a portrait or a still life, even, you can get away with just paint the thing and then the space around it is yeah, it's a color, it's shapes, but um whereas with a space I composition becomes much more of an issue. Um, Something that's been on my list for a long time, a problem that I haven't solved to my satisfaction is combining the two, people in a space, you know. And that's something with this studio. This building is huge. I'm going to have my dream studio. It's going to be this giant open space where I can do anything. I
Wow.
can set things. I'll be able, I mean, imagine like if I had a stage or a theater, it's going to be like that. Like I can set things up however I want them. And one of the things that I really want to take on is people in a space. And the way I'm designing the studio is the studio will have a very clear view into like a living room and no walls separating them between like a living area and a kitchen. And one of the things I'm really looking forward to is like instead of just having a board model sitting on a box like in a lot of classrooms, to be able to tell someone like just just go in the kitchen and cook. And
Mm,
I'll be able to set up in my studio and paint that happening. As far as how they influence each other, uh, one thing I've learned from painting people from life is to go right at, you don't get have a lot of time, you know. For the most part, I work in it's one shot, like it's one sitting, and that's what you get. And you kind of have to find an economy and like capture that thing while it's happening on the spot. And that has helped with landscapes as well, being able to do that. Um, so I think that's probably the best as far as like how they kind of influence each other. And I guess the other thing I should say is that painting spaces, it has made me more attuned to composition. And even if a painting of a person is a simple composition, it still is a composed. I
mhm.
still think about like, well, what's happening in that negative space? How's that lending itself to the expression of the painting? So yeah, there's how the two relate. Um, I think it's just personal preference, you know. I mean, and I'll use acrylic sometimes for like an underpainting, or in my sketchbook, a lot of the times I'll work with ink. Um, it was just of all the things I sort of tried, oil paint was the one that most kind of suited the way that I wanted, what I wanted paint to do. I do mess around with other mediums and materials, and actually underneath my oil paintings, often there's like ink drawings and things like that. I can't get color to do what I want with anything else as well as I can get oil paint to do it. I think one of the reasons for that, I like the way that it stays workable. It's easy to get muddy colors with oil paint because it never dries. And so as you're painting onto a wet painting, you're actually mixing your colors together. And if you make the wrong move color wise, it can get muddy. But um if you do know, you can do really cool tricks. Sort of related to that is I started when I was young, when I was like a teenager, probably. I did a lot of ink washes and watercolors when I was a kid. And I didn't realize this when I started painting, when I started teaching painting, I was seeing people struggle. And I was like, why is that? What are you like just with using a brush? And I was like, why do I understand how to do this? Why do I have to explain this? Why don't people understand like, and I finally realized it was like because I started with ink and it is so unforgiving that I learned when that brush hits the painting, it counts and it matters. And you can't just stick it there stupidly. Like you got to think about how that brush feels, how you're holding it. I mean, I don't think about it consciously. Like, is it wet? Is it dry? Is like, are you moving it? Are you hold, all those things. Like, I developed a real sensitivity for using a brush with those really unforgiving watercolors. And that actually translated really well into oil paint just because I was like mark conscious. Talked about like how do you get ideas? And even though I don't really run out, and I mean, there's plenty of stuff I could just paint, I feel like I could I've done enough paintings that were like, okay, that's pretty good. And I could keep doing variations on those themes forever. but I don't want to just keep doing the same thing. I want to find like, and it'll be similar, but I want to find like something, the next thing. What else is interesting? So like looking for that. I've talked about this space and how I'm going to try to solve some of those problems, but it's presenting me with some new problems too. One of the things that's always bothered me is the art business. So let's say I can produce 25 paintings that meet my standard a year. Take what you think a good professional salary for someone should be, divide that by 25. That's what I would need to sell those paintings for to make a living, to make a good living.
Yeah.
It's a lot of money. And it's always bothered me that, and this is one of the reasons I didn't like painting when I was in art school, was I don't like making something that only a few people, and not necessarily my friends, can afford to buy. That's never set well with me. I want my art to be relatable and accessible to my peers, to people that are like me, people that I know and like. And um, so finding a way to build a career that enables me to keep doing the art that I want to do and make a living is a huge challenge. What the best thing that happened, I never said I wanted to be a teacher. At some point, someone asked me if I'd be willing to teach a class, and I was like, yeah, I could probably do that. Um, but teaching solved a lot of that problem for me because I can teach a class at a price that, a reasonable price that someone who wants the class can afford.
Mhm.
For a couple of $100, someone can take one of my classes at RVArts. And that's one of the things I'm going to do with this studio is this is going to be a place where people can come and uh, take a class or a workshop. And it's out in the country, and maybe people can like camp, or maybe I'll build some little cabins or something. It's going to be awesome. But that's down the road a bit. But teaching, it lets me make what I do accessible to anyone, and that's really important to me because I just that guy that taped the banana to the wall and sold it for millions
Yeah.
of dollars. F that dude. I don't want to be him. I don't want to be a guy who and there was an article where someone, when interviewed, he bought the banana from a street vendor right before he went into Sotheby's and taped it on the wall. And he bought it from that street vendor for $2 or $1.50 or something. And the interviewer told the street vendor, he's like, "Hey, did you know that this guy just flipped that banana for millions of dollars?" And the dude started crying. He was
Oh
like,
my
"I'm
gosh.
poor. I'm never gonna see that kind of money." And I don't want to be him. I want to be the guy that like the street vendor gets a painting,
Hmm.
or takes a class and learns to make art himself, or um that's really important for me. So teaching has filled in that gap. I remember when I was young looking at a lot of adults and telling myself I'm never going to be like him, or and I know that sounds like kind of crappy and negative, but like I was like I'm not going to be like that person. I'm not going to be them. Um so that was actually I was anti-influenced to not be like people. I did have some really good art teachers, and I got different things from each of them. A guy named Clyde Fowler. I did a summer program at North Carolina School of the Arts. It was like a total immersion in art, and it was really serious. It was like it was almost like they crammed the first semester of art school into that summer for high school students, and it was intense and a lot of work. I had this drawing teacher there named Clyde, and it was like what my programs are for y'all at Maggie Walker. Lots of times it was the first time I drew figure models from life. I was like, I don't know if I can do this, because he's like, okay, you got 30 seconds to draw this person. And it turned out I just loved it. So I had a couple other art teachers like, in different high schools. One of them was Buddy Terrell. You might know him. What I got from him, actually, he might have influenced me more as a teacher. Like when I started teaching, like things that I remembered him doing in class, like, oh, that was really good. If you make art, you're an artist. Of course, there's different levels and everything, but I I hate the idea that people might leave art behind because they feel they're not qualified or they didn't pursue it, they didn't go to art school or something. Like anyone can keep making art, and in fact we should. People should take time to do creative things and pursue creative things. And even if it's not a career, you can take it seriously when you're doing it. You can do it as try to do it as well as you can. Um, the same way that people exercise, and they're not all trying to be professional athletes, but people, I got a time to take a walk. I got, same thing. You like time to draw. Find some mentorship. Find someone who is in a role that you want to be in, and and I think if they're a decent person, they will share this stuff with you. People that I've seen that have been successful, a lot of them had somebody that was 10 years down the line ahead of them that was able to sort of guide them and say, this is the position you should be applying for. This is the gallery that you should be talking to. Um, this is how your portfolio should look at this stage right now. Um, if you can find that, that can save you years in art and probably in other careers as well, like finding some kind of mentorship or guidance like that. So yeah, there you go. There's my advice.